Hello and welcome to Change My Mind podcast. I thought we were going to have some background music this week because, I was listening to Blind Mike Boatman and his podcasts have background music and I like the idea. And it's not that we're trying to rip Blind Mike off, but the whole thing is I learned from him, and it's not that I rip him off, but that what use is I listen to podcasts to learn, and what use is information if we can't understand and apply it. So I was learning from Blind Blind. I was trying to put in some music, but that's why the podcast is a little bit late. It was supposed to start at 3 o'clock, but it started a little bit late because I was trying to get my background music. But we're just going to have to go with this week's podcast. We're going to talk about absurdity in the universe, and the philosophy of the absurd, understanding the absurd. And that's why the podcast is called The Pope's Toilet. Because when I first thought about, I will talk about absurdity in the universe, it's back when I was about 20. When I was about 20, went to see a band one time in Tullamore, and it was The Pope's Toilet. And it was an absolutely absurd night where there was all sorts of absurdity, but yet at the same time you see a rational order in it, because it was the first time I actually stood back and looked at everything and said, oh, that's karma. So that's why this week's podcast is about absurdity, and I decided to call this week's podcast The Pope's Toilet. We're improving a little bit better every week. We're inside this week. I was going to be outside, but it was going to rain. So we're going to do the same thing again this week. We're going to read from this book. And as we go, I'll stop and explain it to you to make sure as many people as can understands it. I also decided that this week we're going to go with a live podcast every week at 3 o'clock on a Wednesday. As I say, I'm a little bit late this week. And we're going to go live because what this podcast is all about is embracing the absurdity of the universe, and embracing absurdity, and at the same time understanding that there's a rational order to the universe. So we're going to embrace the absurdity. Everything that can go wrong, and we'll just mix it in. For instance, I bought a new speaker. I thought we're going to have some background music. We had a little bit of time with no background music, and that's okay. We're just going to run with it. But at the same time, we're going to put in some rational order, and the rational order is 3 o'clock on Wednesday. We're going to have a live Change My Mind podcast. So before I get lost in translation, we'll start with the reading, and we'll explain it then as we go. So in last week's podcast, I discussed objective reality. I made a distinction between matter and energy and explained how opposing forces bring about the nature of change. I also said that the more knowledge you have about the variables, the more control you have in determining the nature of change. As Hegel put it, the more you have to understand the particulars. As Hegel put it, this is the sort of thing that can go wrong, the absurdity in it, but I can't understand my own writing. As Hegel put it, the more you understand the particulars, the more you have to understand. You have to understand the particulars before you can understand the universals. Now, I must have wrote it wrong. As Hegel put it, you have to understand the particulars before you can understand the universals. That's what I mean. So, basically what that means is you have to understand all the small things, the small things before you can understand the universals. Last week I was explaining about all the different variables that impact on the nature of change, that we are matter, and all the variables, for instance, our position in the Earth's position in orbit, and the difference of the two systems the two systems in our orbit around the sun and our solar system's orbit in the Milky Way, and how everything interconnects and how all the different opposing forces determine the nature of change. And what I'm going to do this time now is I'm going to break it down further again. So we're going to look at absurdity. And as I say, this podcast, by the way things are going, this podcast is going to be fairly absurd. So we'll push on. This week I'm going to talk about the absurd. The absurd refers to the conflict between human tendency to seek inherent meaning in life and the silent answer of the universe, in which a harsh truth arises that there is no inherent meaning in life. Existence is the absurd because of the conflicting views between humans and the universe. So this relates to what I was saying last week, how the nature of change is determined by opposing forces. And the more we can understand how these opposing forces interact, the more we can determine the nature of change. So basically, this frustration is caused by reality not matching your expectations. It is a refusal to accept the world as is. It is not as you think it should be. This causes frustration, often to the point of despair. Hence, Camus' fundamental philosophical question: should I have another coffee or should I kill myself? Basically, this is bullshit. There is no sense to all of this. There is no meaning to life. Why should I stick around for this shit? What point? What point of it all? This is a miserable existence waiting to die. Like, life is perception. Man's search for meaning. I'm in the different philosophy groups, and that's a huge question, especially in existentialism. I see a lot of people coming on asking about, what's the meaning of life? What's the meaning of life? There is no meaning to life. This is all shit. And a lot of people seem to get very frustrated in this quest for meaning. That what's the sense of it? What's the sense to all this search for meaning? What's my purpose? Why should I even stick around for this bullshit? You know what I mean? And so we're going to look at, it's about the complete absurdity of life, that there is no inherent meaning to it. So we're going to break down the meaning of life in today's podcast, and we're going to look at the absurdity of life. But we're also going to acknowledge that in life, like for instance, Camus wrote a philosophy about the absurdity of life and said, life is absurd. And looking at the absurdity of life, but at the same time there is a rational order to life. So we're going to look at how, as I say, before I get into the paradox of absurdity and rational order coexisting in the universe, I will say a few things about the absurd at an individual level. I could throw affirmations at you all day, but let's really get into this. I'm going to try and explain in a way that everybody understands. Not everybody's going to understand. This podcast, as I say, is going to be fairly absurd, but such is philosophy. If you want to ask me questions, ask me questions. But we're going to follow the same pattern as last week. I'm going to go through my readings from my journal, and I'm going to try and explain it to you. And sure, you can try to keep up, or you can. And as I say, if you don't understand, peg in a question. So I'm going to put it in a way, as I say, that everybody understands, and I'm going to do so by reading from my book and then explaining my readings. Life is like theatre. Life is like theatre. Life is theatre. This is all theatre. Or to make it more relative, the movies. Movies are modern day theatre. We all have a role to play. Some of us have a lead role. Some of us have a walk-on part. Some of us are one of the many extras that are necessary in the narrative. But for this reason, I say that essence precedes existence. Like, this is all theatre, and for instance, like, we all have a role to play, but some of us look for this great purpose and this great meaning. And in your particular role, like, for instance, some of us might have a lead role, like Martin Luther King would have had a lead role. And Donald Trump has a lead role. For instance, he's making a huge impact. A shepherd leading sheep, he's making a huge impact. He's going to make a huge impact in the lives of others. But we don't all have a lead role. Many of us are extras in this theatre. But the extras are necessary too. Like if you're looking at a movie and you see all the people drinking coffee, or they might be all at a banquet eating food, but they're all necessary to the narrative. You can't have, they're a very integral part of the film. Like, or for instance, if you were watching Braveheart, for instance, all the warriors and all the war scenes, they all need extras. All these people play an integral part in the film, or they may have a walk-on part. You might see a lad walk into a bar and buy a pint. It's a walk-on part, and that might be a short life. But this is all theatre. So if we take that perspective and look at life as theatre, a movie, and from that perspective, then we can say like that we all have a part to play. But one role, like we all have a role, and that's why I say essence precedes existence. We all have a purpose. But one role we don't have is we're not the director. And the director, like, for instance, like, has many roles. For instance, like he might have Tarantino. He might have a role like Tarantino. For instance, My Life is Very Absurd. Now, Tarantino is a perfect example of the absurd. If you watch, for instance, Pulp Fiction, it's full of the absurd. But yet the absurd all interconnects and comes as a part of one narrative. You know what I mean? It all becomes clear. As you sit in the theatre and you watch this movie, it's completely absurd, but yet it's all a part of a narrative, and you leave saying to yourself, oh, that was a really superb film, because all the absurdity had a narrative. In other words, it had a rational order. Do you know what I mean? So Tarantino would have wrote the film, and then the actors would have all played their parts, and it all comes across pretty absurd, which it is, but yet it all had a rational order. And life is the same. Completely absurd, but yet there is a rational order. There is a narrative. But the narrative doesn't become clear until you watch the whole, take the view from above. Watch the whole thing. The whole thing culminates in a narrative, if you know what I'm saying. Now, also there's other movies as well, and it all commenced, as I said, becomes part of the narrative. But like all movies, it's all theatre, but a good movie invokes emotion. It invokes a reaction, it invokes emotion. For instance, like Notebook sticks with me as a really, really brilliant movie. And the reason I remember The Notebook is because the best feelings in our lives are all tied to emotion. So, for instance, if I watched The Notebook, it moved me to tears. And I always remember The Notebook as a result of it evoking emotion. It's tied to a strong emotion. It's attached to a strong emotion. So I'll always remember The Notebook. I remember Pulp Fiction because I remember sitting there and you're saying to yourself, oh, lads, this is crazy shit. But yeah, it was an absolutely spectacular movie. And Django, all Tarantino films the same, completely absurd, but yet there's a narrative. And for instance, but yet there's a good movie also has tragedy in it. For instance, the ancient Greeks used to make plays, theatre, based on tragedy, and that was an ambiguous reason. And a lot of the reason was so that people could embrace tragedy as a part of life, and they could embrace life as theatre. And Embrace tragedy as a part of life and gain an understanding that tragedy is a part of life. And that's why when we see tragedy in this life, embrace it as all theatre. It's all a show, lads. It's all theatre, one big theatre. But just also remember that you are not the director. You are definitely not the director. You have a role. And even though some of us like to be divas and throw a big strop and say, fuck this shit, or say I want to do it this way, in this production there can be a lot of impromptu acting because it's all shot in one take. And there can be a lot of impromptu acting. Impromptu, you know, like, for instance, like, it's not that I forget my lines, but I'll do what I like. I'll be a diva and I'll do what I like, and you'll just roll in and you'll react and you'll respond, and it makes for great theatre. Impromptu acting makes for really great theatre. But I'm getting lost, so we'll get back to the journal. So, accepting and embracing absurdity is about realising how little is within our control, but at the same time not relinquishing what control we do have, and being blown around the universe like an inanimate object. Now, realising what little control we have is, I'm really going to get into this and I'm really going to break this down, but a lot of people do not realise how little control they have, because they think that they are fully in control, and what they have is an illusion of control. And in order to demonstrate this, I'm going to use more theatre, and I'm going to take the series Britannia. You know the Britannia series that was on there where you had the Romans invaded England? I'm a huge believer in the philosophy and art, that there's great philosophy in art, because the universe speaks to us through this art. And if we apply critical thinking, there's some serious philosophy in this, because all creation comes from one source. Now I'll get into this at a later point, but all creation comes from one source. Everything comes from one source. And I will break this down for you and I will explain this to you. But the universe, our creativity comes to our 8th level of consciousness. So creative people, it all comes to our 8th level of consciousness. So all this theatre and all these movies and all this, they have a narrative, all have a message. And if you apply critical thinking, there is some marvellous philosophy in this creativity, in these productions. And in this Britannia series, there was some really marvellous philosophy in it. Marvellous, and I mean marvellous. But to explain this, where I'm going with this, we had the Roman general who comes on and he says, where I walk is Rome. And I won't get lost in that tangent, where I walk is Rome. But anyway, because that's massive. I'll do a separate podcast on all that. I will. But anyway, he went to the Druids and he realised his role he saw who he truly was, and he saw that what his purpose was, what his role was in this life. And exactly like, as I said last week, they stay using the genetic codes over again, and he realised who he was. And when he realised who he was, when you realise who you are, when you realise your true nature, it's quite powerful, It's quite powerful. But anyway, he realised who he was. And he realised the whole rational order of the universe. And he also got, when he went to the Druids, he saw this prophecy of how a man with a blind daughter, a father with a blind daughter, the daughter of the blind man was going to have a huge influence on, on Rome taking over England. So he was looking for this daughter with the blind father in order to control the nature of change. He wanted to kill the daughter of the blind father. But what happened was then his captain, they had taken over this village and burned the village, and they had taken the few of the boys captive, a few of the warriors captive, and the captain heated the sword in the fire and burned the eyes out of father. But the father then escaped. The daughter helped him escape, And the general, I might get lost, but the general anyway went looking to do a talk with the village in order to, before he burned them out, before he invaded the village, before he took it over. And he saw this blind man, the lad who was after escaping, that his captain had burned the eyes out of him, and he saw him with the daughter, but he didn't capture him. But he went back to his captain and he was explaining to the captain, "Oh, I saw I saw the daughter with the blind father." And the captain says, "What blind father? That's all bullshit. Sure, I blinded him. That's bullshit. I blinded him. I said I could have cut his arms off, and I could have cut his ears off." And the general said to him, "But you didn't." And he said, "Well, I could have killed him. I could have stabbed him. I could have thrown him to the hounds." And the general goes, "But you didn't." And everything was, "But you didn't. But you didn't." I'm after going off on a bit of a tangent, but what I'm trying to explain here is, when we get into the whole absurdity of the thing, I hope to explain here today that you don't have as much control as you think you have. And when you realise how little control you have, you can identify what control you have. That's when you have control. When you realise how little control you have, then you can utilise what control you do have. And this is huge. And that's what I'm going to try and explain to you in this podcast. But we'll get back to my book, because I'm after going off a little bit of a tangent. I don't want to lose you. I told you this was going to be absurd. Now, it is only through understanding that you can fully accept and embrace absurdity. Understand the rational order of the universe, and as I said at the start, when you can understand the particulars, you can understand the universals, and then this allows you to have more control in determining the nature of change. Now, absurdity was Camus' philosophy, and that's where we got the whole Camus' fundamental question of, should I have another cup of coffee or should I kill myself? Because what Camus' philosophy was about, and the backbone of his philosophy, was that you have three choices. You can pick up the ball and go home. If you want to pick up the ball and go home, you're perfectly entitled to do that. It's your life. So if you want to kill yourself, that's just sound. That's your choice. And no matter how upset anybody else gets about it, they should realise that it's your life, and you can, should you choose to top yourself, that's perfectly fine. You can pick up the ball and go home anytime you want. So that's your first option. The second option then is you can embrace the absurd. Embracing the absurd, in order to embrace the absurd, you first have to understand the absurd. And that's what we're going to try and do in this podcast today. And your third option then is to rebel against the absurd, is rebellion. And I think that's the best option, to start a revolution. And that's what this podcast is going to be about. We're going to rebel against the absurd. I'm going to lead the revolution, actually. I'm going to lead the revolution by empowering you. I am going to explain, and when you explain how you can, because when you can understand the nature of change, we can determine the nature of change. Do you know what I'm saying? So I'm going to empower you by explaining the absurd, and then we can embrace the absurd, and then we can rebel against the absurd. And that's what we're going to do, and that's what this podcast, Change My Mind, is going to be about. It's going to be about rebelling against the absurd. Now, so that brings us back to where I finished my last podcast and began this one. The nature of change. We are made of stars. Living organisms often contain trace amounts of elements, but the most abundant ones are oxygen, carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, calcium and phosphorus. We are matter in our present state. For the purpose of explaining this, time is an illusion. We are matter in a constant state of flux. Change is the only constant. We are matter constantly changing from one state to another. as is everything around us. So what I mean by that is that time is an illusion. The past and our future self. Now this is a little bit more complex, but I'm going to come back to this and I'm going to break it down for you in more detail so that you do understand it. But the past and the present interact, cross over right now in the present moment. They intersect. That's why the present moment is the driving seat for life. Because our past, and I will explain how, hopefully, in this podcast, and if I don't, in this podcast, in the upcoming podcast, because it's quite complex, but I'm going to try and lay it down layer by layer. And our behaviours and our actions are determined by our cellular construct, if you know what I mean, by our cellular makeup, our chemical makeup and our cellular makeup. For instance, the hippocampus in the brain, which stores information from our past experiences, is made up of cells. So therefore, all our preconceived notions, all our preconceived conditioning is all stored at a cellular level and impacts on our thought processes and on our behaviours and our actions, which determine the nature of change. And then, for instance, our goals. So for instance, if we set our goals, I have a goal. I want to slay the dragon. I want to bring down the monetary banking system. I have a different system in mind. I actually have a whole plan for social reform, libertarianism based on virtue ethics, and that's my goal. But for instance, that goal, I'm striving towards that goal. So that's the future. So in other words, the past and the future are determining my behaviour in the present moment. Do you know what I mean? So my actions in the present moment are determined by my preconceived ideas, my preset conditioning, which I did my own conditioning. My goals in the future are all determining my behaviour in the present moment, because what we do now is what determines the nature of change. Do you understand me? And that's why the past and the future are intersecting at this point, right now. And that's why all we have is now, the present moment, the driving seat for life. Very important that you understand that point. Do you understand? And that's why it's very important not to be living in the future, not to be living in the past, but fully immersed right in the focus right now. For example, let's go back to the theatre of life. That if you go to the movies and you're watching Pulp Fiction, the absurdity of Pulp Fiction, and or any other Tarantino film, and you're watching it, you're not sitting there saying to yourself, oh, what's going to happen in 15 minutes? And you're not thinking about, oh, what happened what happened back at the start. You're completely immersed in the present moment, and you're saying, wow, this is some fucked up shit. But yeah, it is absolutely amazing, entertaining, mind-blowing, and you can have that perspective once you see life as theatre. And I'll come back to this in another podcast when I'm explaining about Nietzsche and the child stage in life. But if you have that perspective and you're there, like, seeing it as theatre, and you're looking at life as theatre, and for instance, you're looking at all the people running out of Tesco with the trolleys and spraying their hands with the sanitizer and everything, and it's all theatre, you're saying, man, this is amazing shit. You're completely immersed in the present moment, and it's all fucking amazing. And you have a role in this, in all this theatre, but you can determine your role and you can impact on the narrative. But you first have to understand exactly what's in your control, because otherwise all you have is an illusion of control. And it's very important to make that distinction, which we will do now in a minute. So everything starts with the thinking. So at this point, let's identify the variables that affect our thought processes. We're getting into it now. I say everything starts with the thinking, because the way we perceive the world impacts on our thought processes, and our thought processes impact on how we see the world. It is really important to understand why we think as we do. So let's break down the different variables. Now, as I say, everything starts with the thinking, because everything comes from one source. And when you understand that, like even from everything starts from one source, because if you remember last week that we are matter and everything started with one cell, so we'll say that cell was in the Garden of Eden, and that would have been the start of life, the start of creation, Genesis. So that cell was a pseudopod, subdivided, now it was two cells. So atom, if you know what I'm saying, that cell subdivided and was two cells, and then subdivided again. So if you read the book of Genesis and you name these cells, so we had Jacob and then all the sons, this is the cells subdividing. So Genesis is at a cellular level, and for instance, in the first day, God created whatever he created. I can't remember what he created in the first day. The earth. But that would have been 63 million years, because everything is relative and time is relative. So if you take our orbit of our solar system in the Milky Way takes 230 million years. So if we divide that down into one day, that'd be about 63,000 years would be one day. So in the first day God created, would be in the first 63,000 years God created the earth. Do you know what I mean? So take it back to everything is relative. So at a cellular level, everything began from one source, one cell, and that's subdivided into two cells and three cells. And then when those cells, that's how everything was able to fit on the ark, because it was fitting onto it at a cellular level. And then when it, say, for instance, goes to Africa, it mutates, this cell mutates and adapts to its environment. And this is how creation came about. And then our past and our present impact on our current state. So I'll get more into this because I don't want to lose you, but basically electromagnetic radiation, this is what controls our mind. This is the higher self. So that's the future. But I'll come to all that. And that's why I say everything begins with the thinking. So, you know, for instance, like all creativity comes from source. You first have to see it in the mind before you can create it. And I'll explain that. That comes in electromagnetic waves. And the brain translates these waves. Everything comes through creation comes through the 8th level of consciousness, which is the mind, which is electromagnetic waves picked up by the brain and translated into holograms and illusions that are coherent to us. Now, we are genetically disposed to a way of thinking. We have a nature. We are genetically coded. So our cells and microbacteria in our gut, to which we are a host, impact on our thought processes. This is our lower animal, our instinctual urges. Survival is a primary basic instinct, and so is lust. So you know the way the same genetic codes are used over and over again? This is what our nature is, what is in our nature. So when you say according to your true nature, that shouldn't be defined by any one philosophy or any one religion. And there shouldn't be thou shalt, that shalt. There are no rules. The only thing that anybody should do is use reason and then live according to your nature. And don't let anybody put you into these parameters defined by their own morality. Oh, this is good, or you are honest. These parameters, don't ever be boxed in by these parameters that others that use to define their morality and then try and impose on you. In other words, if it's in your true nature to be Pablo Escobar or even Hitler, be that. But live according to your own true nature. And let everybody else worry about their own shit. That's what I'm saying. Play your part. Play your role that you were created to do. Essence precedes existence. Plato said this. Essence precedes existence. You have a role, and living according to your true nature is to play your part. And that that role is driven by a cellular level, your genetic coding, and then you're also called from the future. You know, your creativity, you'll see a vision, the organising idea for the orchestra of the mind, so that the mind plays off one hymn sheet, comes from through the electric magnetic field. In other words, waves. Your brain picks up on the frequency that comes from the mind. That's why I say the mind our reality is in the mind. Our reality is not in the mind. Our reality is in the mind. The mind is external. The mind comes through an electric magnetic field that the brain picks up the frequency and translates it into a current vision. That's why it's called visions. Your vision of the future. My goal, my vision. You know, I have a vision. Or for instance, if I'm going to paint a painting, or if I have a block of marble and I'm going to sculpt a statue, I first have to see this in the mind. But I pick it up in a frequency, in a like for instance, if Michelangelo was going to paint the Sistine Chapel, he first sees it in the mind, and this is what Plato calls the world of forms. Now, I'll go into that in another podcast in more detail, but you first must see it in the mind, and that's the 8th level of consciousness. And that's why I say all creativity comes from the 8th level of consciousness. And not everybody tunes into the 8th level of consciousness. But you can tap into the 8th level of consciousness. And this is where meditation comes in. And this is why meditation and these tools are really great in determining the nature of change. Because it's all about tapping into the 8th level of consciousness. Raising your 8th level of consciousness. Because if you're only perceiving life through 5 senses, you're a lower animal. Right? Basically, you're being driven at a cellular level. You're a lower animal. And you have to raising your level of consciousness is tapping into the 8th level of consciousness. Artists tap into the 8th level of consciousness. I was listening to a Blind by Boatman's podcast there as I walked around the woods there last night, you know, walking around. I'm really enjoying my time. I won't say time off because it's all time off for me, but I'm really enjoying the current environment. I was out walking in the woods and listening to Blind by Boatman, and he did an absolutely brilliant podcast on Caravaggio and on art. I love art, but when you get somebody else's explanation and an education in it, as Blind by Boatman says, you can't teach anybody art. You can only teach them how to see. And that was my great hot take from that podcast. You cannot teach anybody art. You can only teach them how to see. And it's the same with the 8th level of consciousness. You can teach them how to meditate, but that in turn is teaching them how to see. Because when you learn how to see, when you have a higher level of consciousness, you see everything differently. You see differently. So that's what he means by that. You can only teach them how to see. If you want to understand art, you have to see it differently. Now, and Blind Buy's podcast, by the way, yeah, I listen to it on Spotify. The Blind Buy podcast, it's called. And for those of you just a higher level of culture, it's really, he's funny, he's good. I think he'll just be smoking a doobie when he's doing the podcast, because he actually speaks faster than me. But yeah, he's coherent. He slows right down, and I try to slow down, but I am who I am. At the same time, you know, I don't want to do a podcast in a monotone. Because if I talk like this for the whole podcast, it's just not me. So you can just make the effort to understand me. Anyway, so back to the thinking. I'm getting lost on a tangent here. Our impressions are internal and external. So our environment is our impressions. It causes impressions. You know, it determines the nature of change. It causes thoughts to arise. So, for instance, our impressions. If someone offers me an ice cream, or would you like to buy an ice cream, or would you like an ice cream? Offers me an ice cream. That's an impression, an external impression. Now, I can contemplate that impression. I can say to myself, oh, my initial impression might be, oh, ice cream, because I have an incredibly sweet tooth. Or I can say, no. I can contemplate that and say, no. I don't really want the sugar. It lights up my brain like a pinball machine. I'll pass on the ice cream. And that's to contemplate the impression and accept it or give assent to it. So if I give assent to it, I'll take the ice cream. So you can give assent to your impressions, but your impressions, for you to act on them, you have to give assent to them. Do you understand? So how we perceive the external world, as I say, impacts on our thought processes, and our thought processes impact on how we perceive the external world. You see how everything interconnects. Opposing forces determine the nature of change, but one impacts on the other. You know, yin and yang. Or as I say, the Star of David and the occult sign, they're one. But basically, you know, it's ambiguous, but yet what it means is the occult, it's all a part of opposing forces. You have good and, for the reason of explanation, we'll call it evil. It's good and evil. But that sign is both the Star of David and the occult. So good and evil, opposing forces, it's like yin and yang. Opposing forces interact. And this is life, duality and free will. So, we live in an electromagnetic field of which we can only perceive a very small portion. How much of it we perceive depends on our level of consciousness. Hence, people only understand to their level of perception. That's why I'm going to lay this down in layers. The Buddhists say that there are 8 levels of consciousness. First, the 5 senses. The eye, the ear, nose, tongue and touch. The 6th assembles all the information in a coherent whole. Hence, the brain creates holograms and illusions based on messages it receives through the senses and from past experiences. This is what I was saying to you, for instance, how we perceive the world is the brain creates holograms and illusions to make this whole thing coherent. You know, it creates an illusion that we can relate, that we can understand. But at the same time, it also fills in the gaps. And that's why, if you're not completely immersed in your reality, you see the world as you think it is. Unless you're completely immersed in the present moment, you don't see the world. If you don't lose what I was talking about earlier, your cells, for instance, the hippocampus in the brain and your brain is made up of cells. And those cells, like I said last week, your diet is going to determine. You can create yourself. You can create this cellular level. You can control this environment. By controlling your diet and by eating well, you determine the chemical makeup of your body. You determine the cellular makeup of your body. And in doing that, by establishing your own values and defining your own morality, you condition your own preconceived notions and your own conditioning. You set this so you can control how you see the world. And when you learn to see the world as is, by losing your preconceived ideas and your preconditioned like perspectives and preconditioned ideas and notions that are preset by marketing and your environment up to when you reset them by doing philosophy or learning about the metaphysics of the universe. And because your values and your morality define your thought processes. This is what defines your way of thinking. For instance, if you use Christian morality and you go around imposing your morality and everything, in other words, oh, you're a bad man, putting value judgments and everything. Oh, you're a bad man. You're not an honest man. Oh, that's not right. Oh, that's wrong. You know, imposing your morality on others. That's trying to make the world as you think it is. And that's not embracing the absurd. Because that's not seeing the world as theatre. Imagine sitting in a theatre and saying, what's Tarantino at? It shouldn't be like that, it should be different. You know what I mean? That's not seeing the world as is. That's you wanting to be different. And that's what I'm saying. You're not the director. You only have a role. So focus on your role. Your role. Define your own morality. Define your own and set your own values. But don't be trying to direct the production. That's not your role. Do you understand? You know, and that's why I don't often get upset, but I seen this a thing. You know what boils my piss when I see and there's not very much now gets me going, but these affirmations, you know, Jesus, because these affirmations are by design thrown out for people to stick on situations, you know what I mean? Like, for instance, you know, it's not the things, it's their opinion about the things. So people use this as an affirmation, and these affirmations are sold by design. Breadcrumbs, I call them, to the witch's house. You know, breadcrumbs to the witch's house. These little affirmations that people, you know, are, when they're taught them, or when they see them on YouTube, or they see them on Facebook, you know, it's not your things, it's the opinion about the things. That affirmation, that maxim, we call it a maxim. In Buddhism, they have the affirmations. I forget the Buddhist affirmations, but there's loads of them, you know what I mean? But there's loads of Buddhist affirmations, but I forget the Buddhist ones. But there's loads of them, you know what I mean? And they're sold by design, by people who want to capitalise on Buddhism. But the bread comes to the richest house because they lay down breadcrumbs. Come on, children, come on, children. Little affirmations that you think yourself, oh yeah, I'll apply that now. The next time I feel rage coming on, I'll apply that affirmations. It's not the things, it's my opinion about the things. In other words, when someone's pissing you off and somebody's really grinding your gears, you think you're going to say, oh, hold on, and I'll just reframe this. It's not the things, it's my opinion about the things. He's lovely, he's grand. You just hold on there, rage. Hold on there, emotion. I'll just apply this affirmation and I'll delude myself into saying that everything's okay. He's not a prick. He's lovely. He's really lovely. You know what's going to happen then? You're going to fucking kill him. This is going to stay boiling and stay boiling. Suppressing this emotion is going to manifest itself in a terrible way. You're going to fucking kill him. And that is the truth. You're going to fucking kill him. Do you understand? You see now the problem with affirmations. This thing of suppressing the emotions. And it's not about suppressing the emotions. You must go back to source. Everything's back to source. But these people know this. These people know this. And the Christians, for example, knew this. They all knew this. By giving you little teachings. But they kept control. That's why they didn't want the Bible translated into different languages. These people, these teachers, and it happens it's the worst thing ever happened to Buddhism, and it's the worst thing that could possibly happen to Stoicism, because these people retain control by keeping the knowledge for themselves, because by making people feel good, they are indebted to you by their own volition. If somebody makes you feel good, for instance, gives you information or knowledge that, for instance, alleviates your anxiety, even to a small degree, you are indebted to them by your own volition. You will think the sun shines out of their ass, because of course you go to them for more. Of course you go to them for more. You can't get enough of this. Anything that makes you feel good is addictive. So these people, as I say, use these affirmations and these maxims in order to bring you into the witch's house and power. They don't empower you, but they use your energy. They use your light to empower them, and then they burn like a magnesium light. You know what I mean? Do you understand that part? That it must be at source. That you use these. It's very important that you go to the source of these teachings and understand these teachings. That you establish your own values and you define your own morality, which undermines your thought processes. And that's huge. Huge. It's very important you understand this. Now, so information from past experiences is stored in the hippocampus of the mind and the mind. And the mind is stored in the hippocampus and the mind. In other words, when the hippocampus is full, for instance, when your phone, the memory on your phone is full, I've used this analogy in last week's podcast as well. When the memory on your phone is full, it stores the information in the cloud, it backs it up in the cloud. And it's the same with the hippocampus of the brain. When it's full at a cellular level, it has retained as many memories as you are, or retained whatever information that you are using in your current environment. The rest of it stores up in the cloud, so it stores it in the mind. But you can recall it. For instance, I have no use for memories from my childhood, but yet I can recall, if necessary, memories that are appropriate to now. For instance, the name of this podcast, The Pope's Toilet, that I recall a memory from my storage in the cloud, the mind, which was appropriate to the absurdity of the universe. So I call this podcast The Pope's Toilet. You know what I mean? But so what's relevant to my undermine my current thinking is stored in the hippocampus of the brain at a cellular level, but yet information from my past experiences also that's stored in the mind, it also impacts on the present moment, hence the Pope's Toilet. So some of it is included in our instinctual thinking, such as fear. This is the cause of anxiety, and that is often the cause of social anxiety. If you have anxious thoughts about how you will be received, what you do, what you wear, what if you're going to a party some night and you're there thinking to yourself, oh, what will I wear to this party? How will I be received? Oh, it's going to go like this, and then such and such will come over and talk to me, and I'm going to say this and I'm going to say that. And you're trying to control what is not within your control. What was it Seneca said? Abandon. To have expectations in the future. You're trying to arrange what's in fortune's control and abandoning what is within your own. What was it he said? You're trying to arrange what's within fortune's control and abandoning what was within yours, and that's what expectations is. Like, for instance, if you're going to a party, like we've all done it. I used to be terrible for it. And if you're going to a party and you're saying, oh, what am I going to wear? And then I'm going, how will I be received? And you plan the whole fucking thing out. You're arranging on what's in fortune's control. That's absolutely not within your control. The only thing that's within your control is now, what you're doing now. That's all that's in your control. So this is what I'm saying. Embrace the absurdity. Live immersed in the moment. Don't even think about what you're going to wear to the party. You'll decide when you're going to the goddamn party. And then when you go to the party, just let it all unfold before you. The very same as being a Tarantino film. This is fucking amazing. Why suffer in your imagination? With trying to, as I say, you are not the director. And always remember that you are not the director. So just focus on your role, playing your part. And as I say, this is the cause of anxiety. That when you're worried, what am I going to wear? What will such and such think? Will such and such be there? She'll think this of me. Oh, and this anxious dependence on the future. For instance, like I'm going to Greece at the end of the month. And my brother was saying to me today, oh, what are you going to do over there? The shops are going to be closed. There'll be no restaurants. You'll have nowhere to sleep. What are you going to do for money? What are you going to do for food? All this. And I said, I don't know. I do not care. I only care about making a good podcast today. I don't give a shit about. I'm not that far ahead because that is absolutely not within my control. So why would I try to arrange what's within fortune's control and abandoning what lies within mine? What lies within mine? Do you understand? And this is what causes anxiety, because this anxious dependence on the future causes the adrenal gland to release adrenaline. And this adrenaline weeps out. And then when you go to the party and reality doesn't meet your expectations, oh, I thought such and such was going to be here and they're not here. Next thing, oh, it dumps because it's the straw that breaks the camel's back and it dumps. And then you're there, you go to bits, you know what I mean? Because you get all this, the blurred vision, it's the flight or fight response kicks in. So you get the blurred vision because the eyes dilate to try and see more. You become more alert. The heart speeds up. The lungs start to take in more oxygen. The brain goes from the brain. The blood goes from the brain and goes to the muscles to prime the muscles for to either fight or flight. You're either going to run or fight, depending on your nature. But this is what the anxiety does. It primes the body for the fight or flight response. And this is what anxiety is. But what happens then is the brain then logs this at cellular level in the hippocampus, so that amygdala is stimulated. It logs it in the hippocampus as this was a very stressful reaction, and it associates it with this environment, with this everything that went on, and it says we really do not want to repeat this experience. So a defense mechanism kicks in, and you say to yourself, you now develop social anxiety and panic attacks because the thoughts of going to this event again starts off the process of the adrenal gland weeping out the adrenaline. So it's building your anxious dependence again, which is again going to cause you another panic attack. Do you understand me? So you have to reprogram the brain, and you have to understand what's going on. And if you want to get rid of your understanding, live in the moment, embracing the absurdity. Do you understand what I mean about embracing the absurdity? Think of yourself as a Tarantino film. You're not the director, but it's all just fucking amazing. Now, oh yeah. So you have to, so yeah. So the adrenaline leaks out, it dumps, causing a panic attack, but the brain associates it with the environment and logs it as the cause. So this creates, yeah. Okay. Now, the seventh level of consciousness. Oh yes, I've done the five levels of consciousness. The sixth level of consciousness then is the level of consciousness that makes sense of everything. It has a physical component as well, which is the brain. But everything has two components, the physical and the spiritual. We call it spiritual for want of a better understanding, but for the moment spiritual. It is spiritual, I suppose. We call it spiritual, yeah, because it is the electromagnetic field, if we want to put a science definition to it. So we've done the six levels of consciousness. The five senses, which is the lower animal, the cellular level, and then the sixth level, which is also a cellular level because the physical component of that is the brain, and that makes sense of everything. It makes everything coherent and puts it in a way that you can relate, that you can understand it. It's our way of perceiving the world. But the sixth level of consciousness also takes the information that comes through the eighth level of consciousness, and this is what creates the vision. I have a vision. I have a dream. Martin Luther King, he had a main role, he had a lead role. I have a dream, but he had a dream, and our dreams are also brought made coherent by the sixth level of consciousness, but they come through the eighth level of consciousness. Do you understand? So, we've said a good bit on the eighth level of consciousness. Now, do you understand the eighth level of consciousness? So now what we've done is we've done 7 levels of consciousness. The eighth level of consciousness is where the visions, the dreams, the goals, this is how this impacts on your behaviour, because this is your future. And we've done all the past, a cellular level, all culminating, so the past and the future intersect, bang, right now. And that's why time is an illusion, and all we have is now, because it all culminates in the present moment. And that's why everything happens all at once. If you get me. I don't want to lose you. Now, and that's why when we now have only one level of consciousness to do, and that's the 7th level of consciousness. Now, this is really getting into the nitty-gritty, because this is what is within your control. Everything else is not within your control. For instance, your reaction to life, how you respond to life, if you don't establish your own values and define your own morality, you are not in control. You are being driven at a cellular level by the lower animal, and then you're being impacted on by the higher animal if you tune into the 8th level of consciousness, or if you don't, because the director, as I say, the director will control your brain. It'll be like a little remote control car, picking up the electromagnetic waves and determining your actions and your behaviour, like a remote control car, you know. Electromagnetic waves impacting on your brain. As I explained last week, the nature of change, and the electromagnetic field impacts on the cells, which determines the nature of change. So don't undermine the impact the electromagnetic field that we live in, which is the mind, has on your brain, which determines the nature of change. In other words, how your actions within the world. You know, that's the illusion of control, is that you think you're in control and you're not. You're being controlled. For instance, even the microbacteria in your gut, that's how you get fat. If you cultivate bacteria in your gut, fat cells, that they will determine your behaviour. More sugar, more sugar. And you, for instance, that's what they can drive you to the shop. The microbacteria in your gut, if you cultivate the wrong ones, will drive you to the shop to buy eclairs, unless you don't give assent to that impression and say, fuck you and your eclairs. I'll determine the environment. I will create myself by the food I eat, which determines the nature of my cells. Because the body, new cells every 28 days, you know what I mean? The body's continuously regenerating. Now, the 7th level of consciousness. This is what is within our power. Our concepts, values, perceptions, judgments. The physical component is the prefrontal cortex. This is our free will, our faculty of reason. This is within our power. Now, in all the philosophical sites, I do see a lot of people saying, oh, we've no free will, there's no such thing as free will. You're right, you probably don't have any free will. And if you didn't establish your own values and define your own morality, the chances are you don't have any free will. You are being controlled by the director, basically, by forces impacting on matter, and you are just matter being, and the nature of change, including your life, is being determined by greater forces. But subconsciously or consciously, whether you listen to the lower animal or the higher animal is going to determine your destiny, it's going to determine the nature of change. Now, if you listen to the higher animal, this is going to lead you to your destiny. But at the same time, the higher animal, which is really your future self, and I'll explain that, I will explain this, but that's really your future self calling you to your better density. In other words, your soul wants to evolve, and your soul can only evolve if you coming behind it evolve further than you did in a previous existence. Like, all that has to come has gone before. I'm not going to get down that rabbit hole now, but I'll explain it another time. But that's why it calls you to the higher self, you know, evolve. And that's why I say evolution is the meaning of life. You should always be looking to flourish. And if your attitude is right, you can flourish in any environment. For instance, we're here in this environment, and they're trying to confine us to the house. Now, I'm not confined to the house. I go off walking in the woods and everything. I don't give a fuck they don't make the rules. I make the rules. But I went to the shop. How I respond is my choice. So I go off walking to the woods. I'm not going to sit in the house all day just because they tell me to. I go off walking to the woods and everything else. And I went out to the shop and I bought these. See, these are for my hands, because I need to keep the hands good. So I bought little hand grippers, and I bought a Swiss ball, because the gym is closed now, but you can flourish in any environment if your attitude is right. So I bought a set of bands. I have other stronger ones as well, and I do my bicep curls with these bands, and I use the Swiss ball. A Swiss ball is a whole gym in itself. You know, I can lie on the ball and I can do my chest, and I can stand on this, and I can do my shoulders, and I bought a few little things. I bought a yoga mat, which means I don't have to go to shit. I can stay looking after my physical appearance and my body. I can stay creating myself. Because if your attitude is right, you can flourish in any environment. And then I listen to podcasts as well, which is nurturing the mind. Always nurture your soul. And listening to the podcast, for instance, as I say, Blind by Boatman, the Blind by podcast, as I say, last night's podcast on art and the whole, was it ricochet painting thing and the whole history of art, and he's funny as well, so that's nurturing the soul, you know. Colonialism and all about the history of classical art and architecture. That's nurturing your soul, you know. You're learning. So I'm listening to all these podcasts, and that's nurturing your soul. And then I'm looking after the body as well. As I say, you can flourish in any environment given the right attitude and the will to do so. That's what's most important. The will. In order to evolve, the first thing you must have is the will, and then the will, and you control the will. So in order to take control, there has to be the will. Everything's about the will to power. And that's why I say, was it in last week's one, I said, we are a will to power, nothing else besides. And that's what Nietzsche meant. We are a will to power, nothing else besides. And the universe is a will to power, nothing else besides. And we are the universe. So we are a will to power. So stay flourishing, stay moving forward, stay evolving. You know, and I'll go, in the next podcast, I'll go through the different stages of evolution. But, no, back to the seventh level of consciousness, because it's very important that you understand this. And that's why I say that small s stoicism is just absolute bullshit. Because this thing of jumping on your emotions with a fire blanket and using affirmations as a fire blanket to smother the emotions is absolute bollocks. And if you use Buddhism in the same way, using these affirmations to smother the emotions and suppress the emotions, that's never going to work for you. But what it is doing is driving you to the teaching, which they then fleece you. The Scientologists don't do this, as I say. The Scientologists prey on the weak. They cure the drug addicts using the method I explained in last week's podcast, and then the addicts are tied to them by their own volition. You know, they give them their power. You know what I mean? And which pushes up the Scientologists, But what I'm doing here is I'm teaching you how to fish. You know what I mean? I'm teaching you how to fish, because don't use the affirmations. Go to the source. And the thing about this is, when you understand the metaphysics of the universe, and that's why I'm teaching you about the metaphysics of the universe and how everything works, because when you understand the metaphysics of the universe, this understanding undermines, when you understand and you can see it all as theatre, and you can understand how the universe works, there is no emotion. No emotions arise, only emotions that you give assent to. But you see everything so differently. Like, for instance, this is a Tarantino film and it's all fucking amazing. And when you see things differently, there is no rage, there is no emotion, because you understand that, for instance, if someone's grinding your gears, you understand this lower animal is being driven by his nature, and then he has preconceived ideas and preconditioned ideas which are causing him anxiety, and he expects things to be a certain way, and then reality is not meeting his expectations, which is causing him frustration, which in turn he is imposing onto you. And when you have this understanding, you say to yourself, well, I know how it is, so I'm not going to get upset. But you don't have to think about it. You just understand. So you don't pass judgment. You just know how it is. Or for instance, if someone's been a right prick but he's living to his true nature, you understand that this is a very important part of nature, because opposing forces interact with each other to cause change. I'll explain this more in the next podcast. I'll tell you a brilliant film if you really want to understand absurdism, determinism and free will. But if you really want to understand absurdism and determinism and how the universe works, and absurdity and irrational order, look at the film Parasite. It's a South Korean film that has subtitles, but it's absolutely marvellous. It won a few Oscars, and if you apply critical thinking to this film, you will really give you a lesson in absurdity and how absurdity, there is a narrative, and how absurdity, there is a rational order to the absurdity, and it all plays into a narrative. But when we understand all this and embrace the absurdity, we can rebel. And how we rebel is we can determine the nature of change when we understand what is within our control and focus exactly what is within our control. So that is our prefrontal cortex. That is our ability to do the philosophy and to change, to establish our own values, define our own morality, learn and change how we see things, change how we see life. And that is within our control. How we choose to interpret life, how we respond to life. But nobody can, as life unfolds, for instance, if someone's impacting on them in a negative manner, no one can say, hold on a second and I will frame this. No. But what you can do is you can monitor your behaviour, and you can think about how you reacted, and you can say to yourself, I could have reacted differently to that, and I should really, and you can think about it, and then you can apply your teachings, and you can say, in future, I should really have understood better that he is not in control. You know what I mean? He's basically a puppet. And who is the master of puppets? That is the question. Who is the master of puppets? And this rebellion that I'm leading, what this rebellion is all about, is about a quest for freedom. Because freedom is, no one controls me. I'm in control. You are not the puppet master. It's about gaining as much freedom as you possibly can by you determining the nature of change. You determine what you're going to do. You determine how you're going to your future, your destiny, by focusing on what is within your control, your actions within the present moment. But that starts by establishing your own values, defining your own morality, and not being told by them, not being conditioned by them, not being conditioned by Facebook, not being conditioned by anything else. But you choose how you're going to be conditioned. Do you understand? And that's, as I say, when you're playing poker, you have 5 cards. Now, if you don't know how to play, you're going to get roasted. I used to play poker one time when I was in college. I was doing it out block list, and when I was in college, I used to go in on a Monday morning. I used to get paid £12. I used to get paid £12 a week by my father. I was an apprentice fitter at the time, and I was on this block release in college. I was a terrible student, but I used to go in on a Monday morning and the boys were playing cards. And every Monday morning I used to pull up this chair to play the cards. And I used to get fucking roasted. I'd basically keep two of the pound it was at the time. I used to keep £2 for myself for the week, and I used to live then on a carton of milk. For lunchtime I used to buy a carton of milk and I'd just drink a pint of milk every day for lunch. And this was my lunch, because I blew the rest of the money on a Monday morning. The other tenner I blew on a Monday morning playing cards. But the thing was, I hadn't a bloody jizz. I hadn't a jizz clue how to play cards. I didn't know how to play cards. And I didn't think for 1 second, would somebody show me how to play cards? Or I didn't pick up a book and read how to play poker. No, I didn't. I just decided to get roasted every week. And I didn't learn anything. I didn't learn anything. Only how to live on a pint of milk for lunch every day. That's the only thing I learned. Oh, I actually learned to stop playing poker. So eventually I just said to myself, oh, fuck this. Fuck this. You know what I mean? I picked up the ball. I picked up the ball and went home. Because this was just bullshit, as I say. Getting roasted every Monday morning. I don't know why the notion didn't occur to me to just learn how to play poker, but it didn't. And I'm saying the notion doesn't occur to many people to do philosophy and learn about life and learn about metaphysics of the universe. Because when you do this, when you can learn how to play those 5 cards, then you can do some damage. Because a few years later, I was at a party. And the day after, you know, the after party, we were all there the next day playing Texas Hold'em. Now, I had given up the card game. I wasn't playing. But I was just sitting there, you know, having a few beers, doing a few lines, having the buzz, watching the boys playing poker. And there was a girl there, a girl from Limerick actually. And I'll never forget. And she absolutely cleaned the boys. Now, a few of the boys thought they were fucking real card sharks. But she absolutely cleaned them. Took them to cleaners. She went home a solid fortune, cleaned every one of them one by one, but she had skill. She knew how to play her cards. And I just sat there and I just talked to myself and I said, whereas luck plays a very small part in this, there's no such thing as luck. This girl is skinned the boys. Because what she had was skill. She knew how to play her 5 cards. And that's what I'm trying to explain to you in this podcast. If we want to rebel against the absurdity, it's all about learning how to play those 5 cards. Focusing on what is within your control, and what is within your control is your values, judgments, and the actions that you choose to perform. But when you learn about the metaphysics of the universe, you don't judge. So if you're going to go around judging people and imposing your morality on them, oh, you're bad, that's bad, oh, Hitler was a bad man, you don't understand life, and all you're doing is frustrating yourself and causing yourself, as I started this podcast with, is causing yourself frustration with the absurdity. You're not embracing the absurdity, and it can lead you to the point where you want to pick up the ball and go home. You nearly want to top yourself. You're looking for an inherent meaning. So let's make this meaning about rebelling, about gaining some freedom, you know, playing our 5 cards. And that's what this podcast is going to be about. Learning how to play those 5 cards. Life is like chess. I always say this, life is like chess. It's about learning how to play chess. Because if you don't learn how to play chess, you're just going to get fucking roasted by a grandmaster. Do you know what I'm saying? But if you flip the board, you're not going to learn shit. But learn how to play chess and take your beatings. But learn how to play. Stay learning how to play against this grandmaster, and then you too can become grandmaster. Yeah, that's what this podcast is all about. So until next week, as I say again, I enjoyed this podcast, embracing the absurdity and a bit of rational order. I'll be back next Wednesday at 3 o'clock. Oh, I nearly forgot. Blind by both men uses an ocarina pause. In other words, the ocarina pause is before he has an advert. He uses the ocarina pause to warn people that there's an advert coming up. But I completely forgot the ocarina pause. As I say, I'm not ripping Blind by off, I'm learning from him. And I forgot the ocarina pause, so we'll have it now at the end. And my ocarina pause is this chicken. And the reason I'm using this chicken for my ocarina pause is because the 9 noise of this chicken, in contrast to the ocarina pause, in contrast to the advert, means that the advert is it doesn't sound so bad. So we have an advert now. And the advert is, this podcast is being funded by you, the listener. So if you're enjoying this podcast, and you would like to buy me a cup of coffee once a month, go to patreon.com, change my mind, and sponsor me a cup of coffee once a month, because I'm going to Greece at the end of the month and I could really do with a few quid. And as I say, this this is going to be my only funding, is these podcasts. But when I get out to Greece, we're really going to take it up a level. But as I say, I'll be back next Wednesday at 3 o'clock. And as I say, if you can't afford the £3 or the price of a cup of coffee or anything you like, or don't want to, that's perfectly cool. You can just stay turning up and tell others about the podcast. Yeah. So that's this week. And Patreon changed my mind podcast or videos. So I haven't even looked at Patreon yet. But as I say, I need a few quid. I'm going to Greece. Listen, I'll talk to you next week, 3 o'clock. Wednesday, 3 o'clock. Talk to you then. Right, bye. Mind yourselves.